After aging out of the system with nothing but a key to a place he'd never seen, a young man moved to a forgotten farm he'd just inherited. But what he discovered there, carved into the old fence posts, would unravel a secret history of sacrifice and change the meaning of home forever. If you've ever felt lost, or like you've been given a second chance you weren't sure you deserved, this story is for you. Stick around and maybe share your own story in the comments below. I promise I'll read them. The cold was the first thing I remember about freedom. Not the sharp, bracing cold of a winter morning, but a deep, cellular cold that seeped in through the soles of my worn-out sneakers and settled in my bones. It was the cold of concrete that never saw the sun. I'd spent 2 years inside, waiting for my 18th birthday, and the world they released me into felt alien and loud. The city was a roaring engine of indifference. For 3 weeks, I tried to make it work. I slept on a friend's couch until his roommate complained. I washed dishes for cash until the manager realized I didn't have a permanent address. The city spit me out as easily as it had swallowed me. So there I was, sitting on a bus station bench at 2 in the morning, the thin envelope from my last caseworker feeling like a block of ice in my jacket pocket. Inside was a deed, a single, old-fashioned brass key, and a letter I'd already read a dozen times. My grandfather was a man I only knew through blurry photographs and my mother's fragmented stories. He'd died 6 months before my release. I hadn't been allowed to go to the funeral. Administrative complications, my caseworker, Mrs. Gable, had said, her voice laced with that specific brand of weary institutional pity I'd come to despise. She was the one who handed me the envelope on my last day. "Your grandfather, Leo, he left you the property," she'd explained, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the thick paper. "It's all yours, free and clear. Or, well, mostly." That mostly was the part that echoed in my head as I sat there, the bus station's fluorescent lights humming a sickly tune above me. It was a farm, she'd said, somewhere upstate, a place I hadn't even known existed. My inheritance. It sounded like a word from a different language, a different life. For a boy who owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a worn copy of a book he'd stolen from the group home library, inheriting a farm felt like being handed the moon. A distant, cratered, and probably useless moon. But it was also the only place in the world I had a legal right to be. The key in my pocket felt impossibly heavy. It was a choice, but it didn't feel like one. It was the last door open to me, even if I had no idea what was on the other side. The bench was hard, the air smelled of disinfectant and despair, and the last of my dishwashing money was barely enough for a one-way ticket. I pulled out the tattered bus schedule. There was a route that went to a town called Northwood, a place I'd never heard of, that left at 5 a.m. The schedule said it was a 6-hour ride, 6 hours to the moon. I leaned my head back against the tiled wall, the cold seeping into my skull, and closed my eyes. The roaring engine of the city was fading, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't just fear. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just direction. North, away, to a place that was mine. Before I left, I made one last phone call. The letter from Mrs. Gable had included the name and number of a lawyer, Arthur Davies, Esquire, executor of the estate of Elias Vance, my grandfather. It took all the courage I had to dial the number from a payphone, feeding it the last of my quarters. His voice was exactly what you'd expect from an Esquire. Dry, calm, rustling with the sound of paper. "Mr. Vance," he said, and the name sounded strange, like a suit that didn't fit. I was just Leo. Yes, I was expecting your call. I trust you received the documents? I told him I had. I asked him what Mrs. Gable's mostly had meant. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, a slow, measured rhythm. Your grandfather was a very proud man, Leo, he began, his tone shifting from professional to something softer, more human. He was not, however, a man of significant liquid assets. The farm is yours, the land, the house, the barns, but there are encumbrances, another word from a foreign language. He means debts, I said to myself. He means problems. Mr. Davies confirmed it. There were 3 years of unpaid property taxes. Not a crippling amount, he assured me, but not insignificant either. The county would be patient for a little while, but not forever. And there's something else, he said, his voice dropping lower. A standing offer. He explained that a development corporation, North Ridge Properties, had been trying to buy the land for years. They wanted to build luxury vacation homes, a golf course, the usual story. My grandfather had always refused. Vehemently, Mr. Davies added. But the offer was still on the table. It was, he said, a substantial amount of money. Enough to pay the taxes, buy a small apartment, start a life somewhere, anywhere. It's a turnkey solution, Leo, the lawyer said, and I could almost hear him shrugging through the phone. You sign the papers, the debt is cleared, and you walk away with a considerable nest egg. Given your circumstances, it's an option you should seriously consider. His voice was practical, sensible. He was giving me good advice, the smart advice. Sell the useless moon. Take the cash. Don't get tangled up in a dead man's problems. Don't chain yourself to a falling down house and acres of weeds in a town you've never seen. I listened to him, the receiver cold against my ear. I thought about the friend's couch, the greasy dishwater, the feeling of being invisible in a city of millions. Walking away sounded easy. It sounded like relief. But then I thought about the key, the single, solid brass key. It wasn't just a key to a house. It was the only thing anyone had ever intentionally left for me. My grandfather, this ghost of a man, had held on to that land. He'd refused to sell. There had to be a reason. I'm going to go see it first, I said, the words feeling clumsy and strange in my mouth. There was another pause from Mr. Davies, longer this time. When he spoke again, the professional dryness was gone completely. I think he would have liked that, he said, his voice quiet. The address is on the deed. The bus will drop you in Northwood. It's about a 2-mile walk from the station. The key fits the front door. Call me when you've had a look. The offer from Northridge isn't going anywhere. We hung up. I stood there in the echoing quiet of the phone booth, the city's sirens a distant wail. The smart choice was to sell, the easy choice. But something stubborn and foolish in me, something that must have come from my grandfather, wanted to see it. I wanted to stand on the land he'd refused to give up. I wanted to put that key in the lock and see what it opened. The bus ride was a slow-motion dissolve from one world to another. We pulled out of the city's grimy Port Authority terminal just as the sky was beginning to blush with a bruised purple dawn. I watched the skyscrapers shrink in the rearview mirror, their glittering arrogance replaced by the squat, anonymous architecture of the suburbs. Then the suburbs gave way to strip malls, and the strip malls to highways that cut through thinning forests. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, the vibration of the engine, a steady hum that vibrated through my whole body. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from something or being moved by someone else's authority. I was just going. The landscape flattened, then began to roll. The trees grew thicker, the houses fewer and farther between. I saw barns with sagging roofs and fields lying fallow under a pale autumn sky. The other passengers were mostly older people, their faces etched with the kind of quiet resignation that comes from a life lived in one place. They got on and off at small towns with names like Havenwood and Pine Creek, leaving the bus emptier and quieter with each stop. By the time we were an hour from Northwood, I was the only one left. The driver, a man with a kind, tired face, glanced at me in his oversized mirror. "Northwood, huh? Don't get many folks heading up there anymore." I just nodded, not trusting my voice. The name itself sounded like an ending. The bus wheezed to a stop in front of what looked like a general store with a single gas pump out front. A faded sign read, "Northwood General." This was it, the station. The driver opened the door. "End of the line, son." He pointed down a two-lane road that disappeared into a wall of trees. "Your farm, the Vance place, it's about 2 miles that way. Can't miss it. Big old white house, sits back from the road." I thanked him and stepped out. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of a bird somewhere in the trees and the hiss of the bus's air brakes as it prepared to turn around and leave me behind. I watched it go, a big, clumsy metal beetle retreating back to civilization. And then I was alone, truly alone. I adjusted the thin strap of my backpack, which held my book, a change of clothes, and the precious envelope. The road was cracked asphalt, patched in places, with weeds growing in the fissures. I started walking. The 2 miles felt like 10. Every rustle in the woods, every shadow that darted across the road made me jump. My city-honed senses were useless here. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of sounds I didn't understand. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. Just as the driver had said, a house sat back from the road, almost hidden by overgrown lilac bushes and 2 massive, drooping willow trees. It must have been white once, but now it was a peeling, ghostly gray. The roof of the porch sagged in the middle like a tired old man slumping his shoulders. A weathered wooden fence, its posts leaning at odd angles, marked the edge of the property. This was it, the moon, my inheritance. I stood there for a long time, just looking. It wasn't just old. It felt ancient, forgotten by time. It was daunting, terrifying even. But as I stared at the tired gray house, I felt another strange emotion bubble up alongside the fear. It was a feeling of recognition, a sense of homecoming to a place I'd never been. I pushed open a rickety gate that groaned in protest and walked up the gravel path, my footsteps loud in the stillness. This was the place my grandfather had fought to keep. This was the place he had left for me. I was about to find out why. My hand was shaking as I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It felt warm from my body, a small piece of life against the cold, dead wood of the door. The paint was cracked and blistered, and the keyhole was dark with rust. For a second, I was sure it wouldn't work, that this was all some cosmic joke. But the key slid in smoothly, and with a stiff, grating turn, the lock clicked open. The sound was deafening in the silence. I pushed the door inward. It swung open on a long, agonized creak, revealing a darkness that smelled of dust, mice, and something else. the faint, sweet scent of decaying paper and dried herbs. A sheet of dust, thick as felt, covered every surface. Sunlight struggled through grime-caked windows, illuminating floating particles in thick golden shafts. To the left was a living room, dominated by a huge stone fireplace. Furniture sat shrouded in white cloths, like a congregation of ghosts. To the right, a staircase led up into the shadows. I stepped inside, my sneakers silent on the dusty floorboards. I ran a hand over a shrouded armchair, leaving a clean streak in the gray film. This was real. This wasn't a file in a cabinet or a line item in a will. It was a house. My house. I spent the next hour just walking through the downstairs rooms. A dining room with a long, heavy table. A kitchen with a cast-iron stove that looked like a dormant beast. A small study lined with empty bookshelves, the wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. Everything was coated in the same uniform layer of dust, a blanket of time that had settled over everything. It was a mausoleum, a perfectly preserved monument to a life that had ended. There was no sign of my grandfather here, no personal effects left out, no half-read books or dirty coffee cups. It looked as if someone had systematically erased him, leaving only the shell. The place felt sad, but not hostile. It felt waiting. After exploring the ground floor, I stepped back outside, needing the fresh air. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. I walked the perimeter of the house, my eyes tracing the peeling paint and the water stains under the eaves. Then I wandered toward the fence that bordered the property along the road. It was old, the wood weathered to a silver gray, soft to the touch. The posts were thick, square-cut cedar, sunk deep into the earth. As I ran my hand along the top rail, my fingers snagged on something. I looked closer. Carved into the flat top of the post, weathered but still legible, was a name. Anna. The letters were rough, clearly made with a pocket knife. I frowned, running my thumb over the indentations. Maybe a childhood sweetheart of my grandfather's. I walked to the next post. There was another name. Samuel. And on the next post, Chloe. I stopped, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I walked faster now, moving from post to post, a strange sense of urgency building in me. Every single one had a name. Michael, Elena, David, Javier, Sarah. There were dozens of them, stretching all the way down the long fence line, a silent wooden army standing guard. They weren't carved in the same hand. Some were neat, precise. Others were jagged and hurried. Some were fresh, the wood inside the cut still pale. Others were so old the rain and sun had nearly erased them. Who were these people? Why were their names carved into the boundary markers of my grandfather's farm? This wasn't a memorial. It felt like something else. A record, a ledger. The house had felt empty, erased. But out here, under the open sky, the property was teeming with ghosts. The quiet farm suddenly felt heavy with secrets. The sagging porch and the peeling paint were no longer just signs of neglect. They were part of a story I didn't understand. My inheritance wasn't just a piece of land. It was a mystery, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The names on the fence posts changed everything. The empty house was no longer just a burden. It was a container. The silence was no longer just quiet. It was withholding. I went back inside, but this time with a purpose. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was a detective. If the answers weren't outside, they had to be in here. I started in the study. The empty bookshelves seemed like a deliberate statement. My grandfather, Elias Vance, had apparently not been a reader. Or, more likely, someone had cleared out his books. But why? I ran my hands along the walls, tapping, listening for a hollow sound. I checked behind the peeling wallpaper. Nothing. I went to the living room and pulled the dusty sheets off the furniture. A sturdy sofa, 2 armchairs, a coffee table. All of it old, well-made, and utterly unremarkable. I looked under the cushions, behind the furniture. Just more dust and the occasional mummified spider. I was searching blindly, fueled by a frantic, unformed question. Who were you, Elias? What was this place? I moved to the kitchen. I opened every cupboard. A few chipped plates, a single mug, a set of tarnished silverware. It was the kitchen of a man who didn't cook, or a kitchen that had been meticulously scrubbed of any personality. It felt staged. Then I remembered the floorboards in the main hall. When I'd first walked in, one of them had given a little more than the others under my weight. I went back and paced the entryway, testing each board. Near the base of the staircase, I found it again. A slight dip, a faint squeak the others didn't make. I got down on my hands and knees. The dust was thick, smelling of old wood and earth. I ran my fingers along the seams. Most were tight, sealed by years of grime. But the edges of this one board seemed cleaner, the gap wider. There was no handle, no notch. I pulled out the only tool I had, the house key. I wedged the tip into the crack and pried. The wood groaned. I pushed harder, my knuckles white. With a splintering crack, the end of the board lifted. My heart hammered against my ribs. I got my fingers underneath and pulled. The board came up, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity beneath the floor. And nestled inside, sitting on the cool, dark earth, was a metal box. It was an old army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. It was surprisingly heavy when I lifted it out. I set it on the floor, my hands trembling slightly. This was it. This had to be it. The latch was stiff but not locked. I flipped it open. The lid opened with a metallic sigh. Inside, there was no treasure, no money, no weapon. It was filled with letters, dozens of them, all in plain white envelopes, bundled together with twine. On top of the stack was a single, thicker envelope with my name, Leo, written on it in a shaky but elegant cursive. I lifted it out. The paper was thick, creamy. I turned it over. It was sealed with a drop of wax, but there was no imprint, just a smooth, anonymous circle. I sat there on the dusty floor, the ammunition box open beside me, the letter in my hand. The light from the window was beginning to fade, and the house grew colder around me. This letter was from him, from the ghost. It was his voice, waiting for me in the dark under the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. I unfolded the pages. The same shaky cursive covered the paper, line after line. "My dear Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and it means you have come home. I am sorry for so many things. I am sorry I was not in your life. I am sorry for the silence. There are reasons, and I hope by the time you finish reading what I have left for you, you will understand, if not forgive. This farm is yours now. It is a hard place, and it will ask much of you. You will have received an offer to sell it. The lawyer Davies is a good man. He will have advised you to take it. It is the sensible path. It is the easy path. But I did not leave you this land so you could have an easy life. I left it for you so you could have a meaningful one." I had to stop reading. my eyes blurring. I looked around the dim, silent room. A meaningful life. The words felt like a challenge, an accusation. What did he know about my life? The sterile rooms, the shouting matches, the constant grinding feeling of being a problem to be managed. I took a deep breath and continued reading. The first thing you must understand is that this land is not just dirt and trees. It is a promise, and the evidence of that promise is carved into the fence posts. You will have seen the names. Each one of them is a person I helped, or rather, a person this farm helped. People who, like you and like me long ago, found themselves with no other door open to them. Anna, Samuel, Chloe. They are not ghosts, Leo. They are graduates. Graduates. The word hung in the air. I looked up from the letter, out the dirty window toward the fence line. A record, a ledger, a graduating class. The mystery was cracking open, and what was spilling out was something bigger and more complicated than I could ever have imagined. My grandfather hadn't been a recluse. He had been a gatekeeper. The weight of that first letter settled on me like the dust in the house. I sat on the floor until my legs went numb, reading and rereading the words. Graduates. It recontextualized everything. The peeling paint wasn't neglect, it was the patina of a place that prioritized people over appearances. The empty shelves weren't a sign of an unread man. They were a testament to a life lived in service to others, not in the accumulation of things. I felt a profound, aching grief for the grandfather I'd never known. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a man of staggering, secret principle. But grief was tangled with a new, sharp anxiety. What did this mean for me? I did not leave you this land so you could have an easy life. I left it for you so you could have a meaningful one. The words were a gauntlet thrown down from the grave. I stood up, my joints cracking in protest, and walked back outside. The air was colder now, the sun a pale disk hanging low in the sky. I walked the fence line again, but this time I saw it with new eyes. These weren't just names. They were people. Anna. What was her story? Where did she come from, and where did she go after her time here? Samuel. How long did he stay? Did he leave his name on the post the day he arrived, as a declaration of existence, or the day he left, as a mark of survival? Each name was a question mark, a life I could only guess at. I felt like an intruder in my own home, an interloper in a history that didn't belong to me. The offer from Northridge Properties echoed in my mind. The lawyer's sensible advice. A turnkey solution, a considerable nest egg. It was the escape hatch. I could take the money, sign the papers, and walk away. I could let this place and its secrets be bulldozed into oblivion. No one would ever know. The names on the fence posts would become mulch for a golf course fairway. I could go to some other city, get an apartment, find a job. I could be anonymous and safe. Normal. The thought was intoxicatingly simple. This place was a burden. The unpaid taxes, the leaky roof, the immense crushing weight of my grandfather's legacy. It was too much. I was just a kid. I'd spent my entire life being told I was a problem, a file, a case number. How could I possibly be the solution to something this big? I went back inside and sat in one of the shrouded armchairs in the living room. The cold of the house was absolute now, the sun gone completely. I didn't have a flashlight, and the electricity was off. I sat in the dark, the thick envelope with the other letters resting on my lap. The choice was clear. Sell, forget, survive. It was the only logical thing to do. It was what any sane person would do. But as I sat there, trying to convince myself, another feeling crept in. It was a memory, faint and distant, of being a very small boy, before my mother got sick, before the system took me. She was telling me a story about her father, my grandfather. "He always takes in strays," she'd said, laughing. "Kittens, dogs, people, anything that looks like it needs a safe place to land." I had forgotten that. The system had bleached it out of me. He always takes in strays. I was a stray, and he had left me this place, the last safe place. It wasn't a burden he'd left me, it was a lifeboat, and I was thinking about selling it for scrap. I cried then. For the first time since I'd left the city, I let myself cry. I cried for my mother. I cried for the grandfather I never got to thank. I cried for the scared, lonely boy I had been for so long. And I cried for the names on the fence. Anna, Samuel, Chloe. Strays like me. My tears were hot in the cold, dark room. The choice wasn't about money versus land. It was about erasure versus memory. It was about whether I would be the last graduate of the Vance farm or the first one to betray its purpose. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It means a lot. Maybe you've been at a crossroads like this in your own life. A moment where the easy path is right there, shimmering and sensible, but some stubborn part of you is being pulled toward the harder road, the one that asks more of you. It's a lonely place to be, that moment of decision. If you've ever felt that, or if you're feeling it right now, just know you're not alone. The world is full of people standing in the dark, trying to choose between who they are and who they could be. Drop a comment below if this is hitting you. I really do read them all, and your stories, they matter. Now, let's get back to that cold, dark house. When the tears finally stopped, the darkness in the house felt different. It was no longer threatening. It was contemplative. A blanket, not a shroud. I wiped my face on my sleeve, my decision made. It wasn't a grand, heroic choice. It was quiet and bone deep. I would not sell. I would not be the one to erase this place. I didn't know how I would pay the taxes. I didn't know how I would survive the coming winter. I didn't know anything, really, except that I was going to stay. My grandfather had left me more than a farm. He had left me a post to defend. With my newfound resolve came a desperate need for light and information. I fumbled in my backpack for the small, cheap lighter I carried more out of habit than need. The tiny flame flickered to life, a brave little star in the oppressive dark. By its meager light, I found my way to the kitchen. In one of the drawers, my fingers closed around the waxy smoothness of a candle. It was old, a thick white pillar candle, probably kept for power outages. I lit it. The warm, steady glow pushed the deepest shadows back, making the room feel less like a tomb and more like a shelter. I took the candle and the rest of the letters back to the living room. I sat on the floor, the ammunition box beside me, and I picked up the next envelope. It was addressed simply to the steward. Me. I was the steward now. I broke the seal. The handwriting was the same, but the tone was more practical, more urgent. "If you have chosen to stay," it began, "then you have accepted the stewardship of this place. This is not a role to be taken lightly. It is a sacred trust. The names on the fence are your congregation and your history. Now you need to know what that means." He went on to explain. The farm, which he had inherited from his own father, had been a stop on the Underground Railroad. His ancestors had sheltered people fleeing slavery, guiding them north toward freedom. The tradition had simply continued. During the Depression, it was a haven for families who had lost everything. During the wars, it was a quiet place for shell-shocked soldiers to find their footing. And in his lifetime, my grandfather had opened its doors to anyone the modern world had chewed up and spit out. Runaway teenagers, women escaping abusive homes, people struggling with addiction who needed a place to dry out, away from the temptations of the city. "The system fails people, Leo," he wrote. "It puts them in boxes, gives them labels, and files them away. This farm has always been a place outside the system. No paperwork, no judgment, just a roof, a warm meal, and work to do. A place to be a person, not a case file." The words hit me like a physical blow. A place to be a person, not a case file. He was writing my own life story. "The rules are simple," the letter continued. "Anyone who comes here seeking sanctuary gets it. They can stay as long as they need. In return, they work. They tend the garden, mend the fences, care for the house. They contribute to the life of the farm. When they are ready to leave, they leave. Stronger, healed, ready for the world again. And on their way out, they carve their name on a post. It is their mark. It says, 'I was here. I survived. I am moving on.'" I looked at the flickering candle flame, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a farm. It was a sanctuary, an unofficial, unaccredited, and probably illegal refuge for the broken and the lost. My grandfather hadn't been a farmer. He had been a quiet, radical humanitarian. He had built a secret, self-sustaining ecosystem of healing right under the nose of the world. And now it was mine. The weight of it was immense, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a purpose. I read through 3 more letters that night, huddled by the light of that single, heroic candle. Each one filled in another piece of the puzzle. One letter was a practical guide to the house itself. Where to find the main water shutoff, the trick to lighting the old wood stove in the kitchen. Which of the upstairs bedrooms had the soundest roof? It was a user's manual for a life I was only just beginning to comprehend. Another letter was a confession. My grandfather explained why he had stayed away, why he had allowed me to be swallowed by the foster care system. After my mother, his only child, had died, his grief had been a monstrous thing. He had tried to get custody of me, but the state saw him as an eccentric old man living in a dilapidated house with no steady income. They saw him as unfit. He fought them, but the legal battle drained his savings and his spirit. "They told me I was a danger to you," he wrote, the script more jagged in this section. "That my life was too unstable. They were going to adopt you out to a family in another state. I had a choice. I could let you disappear from my life forever, or I could make a deal." The deal was that he would withdraw his petition, declare himself unable to care for me, and in return, the state would keep me within the county system, where he could at least know I was nearby. He agreed to be a ghost in my life so that he wouldn't be erased from it completely. He had been watching over me from a distance all those years. Mrs. Gable, my caseworker, hadn't just been a random assignment. He'd known her. He'd sent her money over the years for anonymous donations to the group homes I was in. Money earmarked for new books, for field trips, for the small comforts the state budget didn't cover. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me in the only way the system would allow. The final letter I read that night was the one that made my breath catch in my throat. "Stewardship requires resources," it said. "I have left you what I can. It is not a fortune, it is seed money. For the taxes, for the winter, for the next soul who finds their way to your door. In the fireplace in the main room, there is a loose stone, 3rd from the left on the 2nd row. Behind it, you will find what you need. Use it wisely. It is not your money. It belongs to the farm. It belongs to the names on the fence. I sat there for a long time after reading that, the candle burning low. The entire narrative of my life had been a lie. I wasn't an abandoned child. I was a protected one. My grandfather wasn't a negligent recluse. He was a hidden guardian. The cold, impersonal system I had grown up in had been secretly influenced by his love. I got up, my body stiff, and carried the candle to the living room. I stood before the great stone fireplace. It was dark and cold, a gaping mouth. I counted the stones, third from the left, second row. The stone looked no different from the others, set firmly in place with old mortar. I pressed on it. Nothing. I pushed harder. I tried to wiggle it. It was solid. My heart sank. Was this some final, cruel test? Had I misunderstood? I ran my fingers around the edges of the stone, feeling for a seam, a weakness. The mortar was old, crumbling in places. I used the end of my house key again, my only tool, and began to scrape at the mortar around the stone. It came away in a shower of gray dust. It took me almost an hour of patient, painstaking work, my fingers raw, my knuckles scraped. Finally, I felt the stone give, just a little. I worked my fingertips into the gap I'd created and pulled. With a low, grinding sound, the stone came loose. I set it carefully on the floor and peered into the dark cavity behind it. Inside was another metal box, smaller than the first. It was a simple cash box, the kind you'd use at a yard sale. It was unlocked. I reached in and lifted it out. It was heavy, so heavy. I opened the lid. It was full of cash. Neat stacks of 20s, 50s, and 100s, bound with rubber bands. I didn't count it, not then, but I could see it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Enough to pay the taxes 3 times over. Enough to fix the roof. Enough to buy food for a year. Enough to honor the promise. I closed the lid, my hands shaking. This was the final piece. The means. The choice, the knowledge, and now the means. My grandfather had left me everything I needed. The only thing left to do was the work. The next morning, a formal, glossy packet arrived in the mail, delivered by a rural carrier who looked at me with open curiosity. It was from Northridge Properties, their final offer. It was for a number that made my head spin. It was 5 times the amount Mr. Davies had mentioned. It was life-changing money, enough to disappear and live comfortably for a very long time. I looked at the slick brochure with its architectural renderings of pristine lodges and emerald green golf courses where my dilapidated house now stood. I thought about the names on the fence. I thought about the money in the cash box, which felt sacred and heavy. I walked back into the house, took the developer's offer, and fed it to the cold, dark mouth of the kitchen stove. It wasn't even a decision. The first thing I did with the money was not pay the taxes. The first thing I did was walk the 2 miles back into Northwood. The town was small, just a main street with a handful of storefronts. The general store, a diner with a buzzing neon "Open" sign, a hardware store, and a post office. It was quiet, the kind of place where a new face was an event. People watched me from behind shop windows as I walked by. I wasn't one of them. Not yet. I went into the hardware store. It smelled of sawdust and metal and oil. An old man with a friendly, weathered face stood behind the counter. "Help you?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I started small. I bought work gloves, a heavy-duty flashlight with batteries, a bucket, sponges, cleaning supplies, and a box of long-burning candles. Then I got bolder. I asked about an axe for splitting wood and a handsaw. He showed me a few, explaining the difference between them with a patient expertise that told me he'd been doing this his whole life. As he was ringing me up, he paused. "You're the Vance boy, aren't you? Up at the old place?" I admitted I was. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Your granddad, Elias, he was a good man. Quiet, kept to himself, but a good man." He looked me over, his gaze lingering on my thin jacket and worn sneakers. "It's a lot of house for one person. Gets cold up there in the winter." It wasn't a question or a warning, just a statement of fact. I paid for my supplies, the cash from the box feeling strange and powerful in my hands. As I was leaving, he called after me. "Hey, son, the wood stove in that kitchen, the flue is tricky. You gotta get it good and hot before you close it down, or it'll smoke you out." I turned, surprised. "Thank you," I said. He just gave me a small, tight-lipped smile and a nod. It was the first piece of local knowledge I'd been given, the first crack in the wall of my otherness. It was a start. The walk back to the farm was different. My arms ached from carrying the supplies, but it was a good ache, a productive ache. I wasn't just a squatter anymore. I was an occupant, a steward. That afternoon I started the real work. I chose one room to be my own, a small bedroom upstairs with a window that looked out over the front fields. I pulled the sheet off the bed, sending up a cloud of dust that made me sneeze for 5 minutes straight. I hauled buckets of water from the hand pump in the yard, the only running water on the property, and I scrubbed. I scrubbed the floors, the walls, the window panes. The dirt came away in thick black streaks, revealing the clean wood and pale flowered wallpaper beneath. The work was grueling, repetitive, and deeply satisfying. With every swipe of the sponge, I felt like I was washing away not just the years of neglect from the house, but the years of inertia from my own life. I was physically changing a space, imposing my will on it, making it mine. As the sun set, I managed to get a fire going in the kitchen stove, remembering the hardware store owner's advice about the flue. The iron beast coughed a puff of smoke into the room before catching, and then a deep, radiating warmth began to spread through the kitchen for the first time in years. I made a simple meal of canned soup heated on the stovetop, and I ate it at the big, dusty dining room table, lit by a single candle. The house was still vast and dark and full of shadows, but it wasn't scary anymore. It was quiet, and the warmth from the kitchen was a promise. That night, I slept in the clean room, on a bare mattress that smelled of dust and time. But it was the best sleep I'd had in my entire life. I was home. The next day, I called Mr. Davies. "I'm rejecting the offer," I told him, my voice clear and steady. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear him shuffling papers. "Leo," he said slowly, "are you sure? We're talking about a life-altering amount of money." "I'm sure," I said. "This place, it's a life-altering amount of something else." I could almost hear him smile. "All right, son," he said, a new respect in his tone. "I'll inform their lawyers. What about the taxes?" "I'm coming into town tomorrow to pay them," I said, "in full." It was a declaration, an anchor. I was putting down roots in the stony soil of my inheritance. The work had just begun. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm of labor and discovery. My days were governed by the sun and the needs of the house. I woke when the sky lightened and worked until my muscles screamed and the light failed. I learned the language of the farm. I learned the groan of the porch steps that needed reinforcing, the particular way the wind whistled through a loose pane of glass in the attic, the soft, damp smell of the cellar that meant the foundation was sound. Each repaired shingle, each scrubbed floorboard, each load of wood I split and stacked against the coming cold was a conversation with my grandfather. The physical work was a way of understanding him. I imagined his hands performing these same tasks, his mind occupied with the same problems. The farm was his last letter to me, written in wood and stone, and I was learning to read it. I continued to explore the ammunition box of letters. They were not all grand pronouncements of philosophy. Many were practical, almost like journal entries. October 10th. A young woman arrived today, name's Elena. Looks like she hasn't slept in a week. Gave her the blue room. She cried for an hour when I gave her a bowl of soup. November 1st. Samuel fixed the generator. Kid's a natural with engines. He's been quiet, but I see him watching the deer in the morning. He's starting to heal. April 5th. Michael left today, shook my hand, looked me right in the eye, said he was going to try to reconnect with his sister. I have a good feeling about him. He carved his name on the post by the gate before he walked down the road. Reading his words, I felt the house fill up with the spirits of those who had come before. They weren't ghosts, they were alumni. I was living in a dormitory of survivors. The solitude of the farm was immense, but I never felt truly alone. I had the names on the fence and the stories in the box. One afternoon, while clearing out a small cluttered shed behind the main house, I found another trace of them. Tucked away on a high shelf was a dusty cardboard box filled with books. Not the classics or literature I might have expected, but practical manuals. Books on carpentry, on small engine repair, on canning and preserving, on basic first aid. Inside the cover of each book was a handwritten inscription. To Samuel, may you always be able to fix what's broken. E.V. For Chloe, to help you grow things, inside and out. E.V. For Anna, so you can build your own damn walls. E.V. He hadn't just given them shelter, he had given them skills. He had armed them for the lives they were going back to. He wasn't just running a sanctuary, he was running a school for strays. My own education was progressing. I learned how to patch a roof with tar and a trowel. I learned how to clear a clogged drain. I learned that the satisfaction of a perfectly stacked woodpile was a deep and primal thing. My body changed. The soft, pale skin of a city kid who'd been indoors for years toughened and tanned. My hands, once smooth, became calloused and capable. I grew leaner, stronger. The work was shaping me, molding me into the steward the farm needed. I began to think about the future, not just my own, but the farm's. The money in the cash box would not last forever. The farm needed to provide for itself, just as it had under my grandfather. The letters mentioned a large garden. I found the plot, now a choked thicket of weeds and thorns. In the spring, I would clear it. I would plant. I would learn to grow things. I was no longer just fixing the past. I was planning for the future. The farm was slowly waking up around me, and I was waking up with it. The fear and uncertainty that had followed me from the city had been burned away by the hard, clean fire of purpose. I had inherited a falling-down house and a legacy of quiet rebellion. I had chosen the harder road, and every day it felt more and more like the only road I was ever meant to walk. Months passed. The brilliant, sharp colors of autumn faded into the stark monochrome of late fall. The first snow came, a light dusting that outlined every branch and fence post in white. The world grew quieter, more insulated. I had managed to make 2 of the upstairs rooms and the entire ground floor livable, weatherproof and warm. The kitchen stove became the heart of the house, a constant source of heat and comfort. I had paid the back taxes, the clerk at the county office giving me a long, surprised look when I'd handed her the stack of cash. The developer's lawyers had sent one last, almost threatening letter, which I'd used as kindling. They had fallen silent after that. My life fell into a simple, monastic routine. Chop wood, haul water, maintain the fire, read my grandfather's letters, work on the house, sleep. It was a stripped-down existence, but it felt richer and more real than anything I had ever known. My trips into Northwood became more frequent. I was a regular at the hardware store and the general store now. The owner of the hardware store, whose name I learned was Hank, started setting aside things he thought I might need. A box of old canning jars, a slightly bent but still usable shovel. "Found this in the back," he'd say with a shrug. "No use for it myself." The locals still watched me, but their curiosity was softening into a kind of cautious acceptance. I was the strange boy up at the Vance place, the one who was trying to bring it back from the dead. I wasn't one of them, but I was part of the landscape now. One afternoon, a pickup truck I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A woman got out. She was my age, maybe a year or 2 older, with tired eyes and a backpack that looked heavier than mine had been. She stood there for a moment, looking at the house, looking at me where I stood by the woodpile, axe in hand. She looked lost and scared and utterly exhausted. She looked like a stray. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it, the test. The first soul to find their way to my door. I put the axe down and walked toward her, my hands open at my sides. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice quiet. She flinched, as if expecting me to yell. I heard about this place," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "A friend of a friend. They said this was a safe place." I looked at her, and I saw myself on that bus station bench. I saw the fear, the desperation, the last flickering ember of hope. I saw a graduate in the making. I thought of my grandfather's letter. No paperwork, no judgment. I nodded toward the house. "The blue room upstairs is the warmest," I said. "Come on inside. I'll put some soup on the stove." The relief that washed over her face was a profound and beautiful thing. It was like watching the sun rise. She cried, of course. They always cried. I let her cry. And then I gave her a bowl of soup. Her name was Maya. She stayed for 3 months. She helped me plan the spring garden. She was brilliant with herbs. She taught me which plants could be used for teas and salves. She talked very little about where she had come from, and I never asked. We worked together, ate together, and shared the quiet space of the farm. We were 2 survivors, tending to a sanctuary. The day she decided to leave, the snow had melted, and the first green shoots were pushing their way through the cold earth. She had a plan. A bus ticket to a state where her cousin lived. A job lined up. She was ready. Before she walked down the long driveway, she stopped at the fence. She pulled a small pocket knife from her bag, the same one she used for harvesting herbs. I watched from the porch as she carefully, precisely, carved her name into the top of a bare post near the gate. M-A-Y-A. When she was done, she looked back at me and smiled. A real smile, not the haunted one she'd arrived with. "Thank you, Leo," she said. I just nodded. There was nothing to say. I had done nothing but keep the door open. I watched her walk down the road until she was just a small speck, disappearing back into the world she was now strong enough to face. I walked over to the fence and ran my hand over the fresh carving. The wood was pale and smooth. Maya. Her name had joined the others. The farm had done its work again. It was alive, and so was I. Spring arrived like a promise fulfilled. The world exploded into a riot of green. The 2 old willow trees in the front yard wept cascades of tender leaves, and the lilac bushes by the porch burst into a cloud of fragrant purple blossoms. The garden plot that Maya and I had cleared and tilled was now dotted with the bright green shoots of carrots, lettuce, and beans. The work was endless, but it was joyful work. I was not just a steward or a caretaker anymore. I was a farmer, a guardian, a keeper of the gate. The house felt more alive than ever. It was still old, still scarred with the marks of time, but it was a comfortable, breathing home now. The rooms were clean, the windows let in the light, and the scent of baking bread, a skill I was slowly and clumsily acquiring, often filled the kitchen. I had found more of my grandfather's legacy tucked away in the barn, journals filled with notes on crop rotation, on weather patterns, on the personalities of the various graduates who had passed through. He had left me a complete blueprint for this life. I didn't know if I would ever live up to the man he was, but I was proud to be walking in his footsteps. One sunny afternoon, I was out mending the fence on the far side of the property when Mr. Davies' car pulled into the driveway. It was the first time he had ever come out to the farm. He got out of his car, dressed in a suit that looked out of place against the backdrop of my rustic, chaotic home. He stood for a moment, just looking around, taking in the stacked wood, the clean porch, the smoke curling from the chimney. When I walked up to him, he had a strange expression on his face. "Leo," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm. "The place looks good. It looks alive." "It is," I said. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious. We sat on the porch steps, the ones I had recently reinforced. "Northridge Properties," he began. "They haven't given up. They're changing tactics. They're petitioning the county to have the property condemned. They're claiming it's a blighted property, a public nuisance, structurally unsound." My blood ran cold. "Can they do that?" "They can try," he said. "They have deep pockets and a team of lawyers. They'll argue that you, an 18-year-old with no official income, can't possibly maintain a property of this size, that it's a danger to the community." He paused, looking me right in the eye. "But I've been doing some digging of my own. Your grandfather, Elias, was a clever man. Years ago, he established a private family trust. The farm isn't just in your name. It's the primary asset of that trust. And the trust has a charter, a mission statement he wrote himself." He pulled a document from his briefcase. "The Vance Family Trust," he read aloud, "is established for the purpose of providing temporary sanctuary and practical education to individuals in need of a safe harbor from the storms of life." He looked up at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "He codified it, Leo. He turned his life's work into a legal mission. Northridge can't argue that the property is being misused if you're fulfilling the explicit purpose of the trust that owns it. You aren't just a boy fixing up an old house. You're the director of a charitable trust, fulfilling its mandate." He told me what we had to do. We had to formally register the trust with the state. We had to keep records. We had to prove that the farm was what it claimed to be. It was a mountain of paperwork. It was the very system my grandfather had sought to operate outside of. But it was also the only way to protect his work from that same system. It was the final lesson. To protect the sanctuary, I had to build a legal wall around it. My grandfather's quiet rebellion needed to become a registered non-profit. The irony was not lost on me, but neither was the necessity. It was the ultimate act of stewardship, ensuring that the farm would be here for the next Maya and the one after her, long after I was gone. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But now it would be fought on my terms, on the ground my grandfather had prepared for me. I looked out over the fields, green and full of promise. This was my home. This was my inheritance. Not the land, not the house, not the money. It was the purpose, the sacred trust, and I would not let it fall. And so, here I am. It's been 5 years since that day I stepped off the bus in Northwood. The farm is a different place now. The house is painted, the roof is sound, and the garden produces enough to feed us and to sell at the local market. The Vance Sanctuary Trust is a registered, if small, non-profit. Hank from the hardware store is on our board of directors. Mr. Davies handles all our legal work pro bono. We've had 17 graduates since Maya. 17 names have been added to the fence posts. 17 people who came here broken and left here whole. Some stay for a month. Some have stayed for over a year. They work, they heal, they learn, and they move on. The farm is rarely quiet anymore. It's filled with the sounds of work, of conversation, of occasional laughter. It is a living, breathing testament to a simple idea, that everyone deserves a safe place to land. I am no longer the scared boy who inherited a ruin. I am the steward of a legacy. This place has taught me everything. It's taught me how to work, how to build, how to grow. It's taught me that an inheritance isn't something you're given. It's something you choose to accept. It's a responsibility you grow into. My grandfather left me a choice between an easy life and a meaningful one. And every single day, I am grateful I chose this. I am grateful for the hardness of the work, for the weight of the responsibility, for the profound joy of watching someone who arrives as a stray walk away as a survivor. This story isn't really about me. It's about the idea that home isn't always the place you were born, but the place where you become who you were meant to be. It's about the hidden sacrifices people make for love and the quiet ways we can choose to honor them. It's about second chances. So I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Have you ever had to build it from scratch? Have you ever found it in a place you never expected? Share your story in the comments below. Your experiences, your struggles, your victories, they are all part of this larger story we're all living. Reading them reminds me, and everyone else here, that we are not alone in our search for a place to belong. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in the power of second chances and the importance of these kinds of stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a community here, a small sanctuary of our own in a corner of the internet, a place for people who understand that the most valuable things in life are never the easiest. Thank you for listening, and from my home to yours, be well.